There he is. Spike Feresten is walking in now. And
how do I get up there? Oh.
Hurley Haywood and Patrick Dempsey.
Hello.
So enjoy, and thanks, Spike.
Thank you for getting my name right. Hi, everybody. Oh, my God. It's so good to be here again. I'm so excited to talk to you. First of all, thank you very much for buying a ticket and coming here. You know, you're benefiting Monterey charities. It's a nice thing to do in between smoking cigars and buying cars. So I'm happy to be here with you. One of my favorite movies this year was a movie called Hurley. I don't know if you've all seen it, but inspiring and, you know, Porsche motorsports racing at its finest. And today we have not only the guy who made it, but we have the guy who lived it. We have Hurley Haywood and Patrick Dempsey. Come on up, guys. Pour yourself some water. Hi, Hurley. There he is. Come on in. Why don't you sit right there? Good to see you, sir. Thank you for flying up. Hi, fellas.
Hello again. How are you?
Are you having a nice time so far?
Having a great time.
How long have you been here, Hurley?
Well, I actually started in L.A. with our media group, and we drove some pretty cool Porsches up the coast.
Wow.
A two-day trip.
What cars did you drive up?
Well, got lucky, and I was driving the 918.
Wow.
Which is a pretty nice car to drive. But we had, you know, all the old cars, the 996, the 993, the new Spider. So we had some pretty cool cars on the trip.
And Patrick, you just flew in?
Yeah, it was a King Air. And then I had the Panamera from the airport here.
Wow. Well,
I wasn't driving, though. It was like,
that's a 1 hour and 5 minute flight.
Yeah.
I came in on one of those too. It's fun. Well, thank you both for being here with us
Great to
today.
be
We're, I want to get into the movie. I want to talk about Porsche racing. I want to leave a little time for the audience to ask questions because we've got two Porsche racing experts here, and I know a lot of you like these cars, and I certainly have questions about racing. But let's start with the movie Hurley, which, first of all, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Congratulations, Patrick. Hurley, you know, I know you now in an absolutely new light, but, you know, as an admittedly shy person, right, who is forced into the spotlight in this career that gets you into it, right, I was really taken by the moment in the film where you say, sometimes I was so shy and I wanted to avoid cameras and microphones that I thought about crashing to avoid them, right? How has your life changed now since the release of your book and this movie?
I was afraid that you were going to mention that.
Did you really think that?
Well, I mean, I wasn't going to crash the car to do any damage, but I was maybe if I drove off in the field, I would get stuck and wouldn't be able to make it back, and I could make an excuse of why I drove out into the field. But, you know, I was just really shy and bashful to get in front of a microphone. And I knew that if I won the race, I would have to do that. So, but I quickly learned that, you know, it's not so bad, and you can be funny and treat the microphone as your friend, not your enemy.
Is it hard for you to be here today?
No.
Up on stage in front of everybody?
No.
So at some point...
I'm still very nervous. Big crowds like this, I just want to withdraw.
Yeah, well, these people are very nice.
Yes.
This seems to be the year of Hurley, with you being the Grand Marshal at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, Watkins Glen's Historics, here at Monterey Motorsports Reunion. Not to give away the movie, but when, you know, you speak about a young man who came to see you towards the end of the film, right? How has that message been received when you share that story?
Well, you know, literally thousands of people have sent me emails about what they took away from the movie, and nobody has said anything negative about it. And a lot of fathers and mothers have got sons and daughters that are gay or lesbian, and they took away from that film, you know, how to deal with it, how to speak to their kids. The young man that came to my office in Florida, you know, came for the type of a racing interview that I've done thousands of times. You know, it's not something that I was not expecting. And he got about halfway through the interview and he sort of stopped cold in his tracks. He looked at me and he said, you know, I have been bullied my whole entire life. every morning I wake up, every night when I go to bed, I think about committing suicide because I just don't know where I can go and what I can do. I said, just slow down, let's talk about it. I gave him some places where he could go to get some help. And away he went, and I never heard a peep from him. And then about 2 years later, his mother called up, and she said, you had granted my son interview, and I said, okay, yeah, I remember that. And I sort of had this sinking feeling that, she was going to tell me that he had committed suicide. And she said, you completely changed his life. He went from being a really bad student to really a good student. He got accepted to college. So, I just thank you because you saved his life. So, I started thinking about that, and this was even before, Patrick and Derek Dodge came to me with this concept about doing the documentary, and I said, if maybe I can help more than just one kid, maybe I can help 2 or 10 or 100. So that's how this whole thing got started to get evolved.
That's an incredible story. Incredible story. So let's talk about that, Patrick. You and Derek Dodge, you guys are conspiring in your Hollywood production company and going, let's make a movie, let's make a film. How does that happen for us that, even I'm in TV, I don't know how you get movies made. How do you get this movie made? Where does it start?
It started, I think it was 2014 at Le Mans. I had Derek Dodge, the director. He's actually from Maine, and I'm originally from Maine.
And we're both Red Sox fans.
Yes,
All right,
I know there are a few Mets fans that are here. That's a whole other discussion of what's going to happen in the World Series. Derek, he was coming over to do some social media shooting for us at the running of Le Mans, and he started to meet people. It's the first time to any big race, and to start your first experience at a race is Le Mans is an extraordinary first time out. And he really had no idea of the racing world at all. And he God bless you, by the way. And he really was absorbed in it in a new way, and he looked at things differently. And he discovered Hurley, his story, his history, and then he approached me, would you be open if I approached him to do, I really feel like I want to do a documentary about his life. Will he be open enough to talk about this? And I'm like, I don't know. If he is and he wants to do it, I will support you 100%. And that's how it began.
Wow.
And it was 4 or 5 years later that we finally ended up getting it finished.
Is that a film you go pitch to a movie company?
Not at
No,
all.
this is you.
This is all self-funded.
Self-funded.
He did a little bit of a startup campaign to get initially going, and then once I made the decision, once I knew Hurley was involved, then I was committed to making sure that it was done and done properly.
Okay.
But we didn't go to pitch it anywhere.
Right.
And I prefer not to, moving forward, having learned from Art of Racing.
Right.
You're better off if you have an idea, do it yourself.
Yeah.
Fund it yourself, take the risk, and be all in.
If it doesn't have X-Men in the title, you're not going to sell it, right? And you approach Hurley to be your mentor, right? I guess there's Dempsey, Wright Motorsports teaming up with Brumos at the time in the film?
That was 2015.
Right.
We had a couple races. Daytona was the big race.
Was that intimidating for you to approach this champion who's won 5 times at Daytona?
No, because Brumos has always been incredibly supportive to my racing career, even at the very beginning. Hurley was always watching from the distance, checking to see what's going on with my team at the time, and always gave me wonderful little bits of advice along the way. So we had developed a relationship. By the time we got to 2015, it was something that was all sort of gearing up to really focus on a full season in the WEC, starting the season at Daytona, and certainly starting with Brumos. And the legacy of that was great for everybody. I know John Wright, all the drivers, for all of us to represent Brumos at Daytona was a very big achievement. So the pressure was on once we got there.
Yes. Hurley, you've worked with Patrick on the track. What is it like working with him in a movie, in a film? What is he like?
He is super easy to work with. I mean, I go back, really kind of was introduced to Patrick when he was racing for Mazda. And I was watching him as he progressed along, and he got better and better and better as time went on. And I said to him, or I can't really remember if it was to him or to Porsche, that we need to get Patrick in a Porsche, get him out of that Mazda, get him into a Porsche, and let's see what happens. So that all happened, and Patrick has been a wonderful ambassador for Porsche, and it's just great to have him part of the family. And when he and Derek came to me with this project, I had to think about it for a while. I mean, it was not something that I instantly said yes to, but the end result is something that I think is really powerful. And Derek Dodge did a really super job of putting this movie together, and it involves lots of different stages. So and it's difficult for a filmmaker to connect all those elements together where you have something that flows easily. And I've seen lots of movies where you just get completely confused on where you are in the movie. You don't really follow the path. But in this movie, it's really crystal clear. Mm-hmm. And that was fun to watch it all come together. We started off a little bumpy, but once I sort of got my trust in Derek, it's all started to come together.
Now, Patrick, you just smiled when he said it started off a little bumpy.
Oh, it was complete.
The interviewer in me has to follow up on that.
It was the first assembly. You have the rough cut. It was a total disaster narratively because it was all over the place. And Derek has been on this project for 4 or 5 years, and it's hard to get the distance. So that's when we stepped back and we realized we had 3 stories going on, and we had to break them down and to create the narrative with these 3 different storylines. And that's where sort of the influence came in as a producer, just stepping back and saying, okay, think about this. We need another interview to answer the question you set up in the first act, so to speak, and then how do we break this down into 3 different narratives? Mm-hmm. And that was the big challenge for us at that point.
Whose idea?
Because emotionally it was there. It was all in there. It was just simplifying the storyline.
And having it make sense. The Brumos 918 shots are incredible. I
Yeah.
mean, I went back a 3rd time just to watch those shots.
Yeah, that was-
Whose idea was that?
The archival footage, we had a lot of support from Porsche.
Yeah.
I did a documentary, The Road to Le Mans, and the same person who did the archival did it for that. And we just needed archival because you needed to cut away and sort of expand and show this time and place. And for the people who don't understand sport or the motorsport, we wanted to expose them. And then the hardcore enthusiasts, we had to give them something where they were like, that's a cool shot, that's something unknown. And we had great support from everybody at Le Mans, or the organization there, and Porsche. From the very beginning we said, we want to do this, they were behind us.
So Hurley, in the movie, you say that, or I think it was your sister who says that you started driving at 12 years old. How does that work? Were you driving the family car when you were 12?
No, I was born and raised in the city in Chicago, and we had 7 working farms out west of the city, and the one big farm that my grandmother lived on was kind of not really a farm, but it was more of an estate, and it had a lot of roads on it. So I talked our farm foreman into teaching me how to drive a truck. And basically I started off in a 1948 Studebaker truck with a manual stick on the floor, and he built a special seat with blocks on the pedals, and away I went. And I drove that car from when I was 12 years old until 16 without ever getting caught by my family. And one afternoon my father was coming back from playing a round of golf a little earlier than I expected him to, and I almost ran him off the road, and he said, what are you doing? So I said, well, I've been driving this truck, and and so he was pretty impressed by that, and away we went. And when I approached him with the idea of racing, he and my mother were totally against it. They said, you are out of your mind. What are you thinking about? But I came up with this really beautiful proposal to my father. I was a business administration major in college, and he was so impressed with the proposal that he agreed to do it. But the only caveat was that he said, you have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet after 2 years. I'll help you support it for 2 years. After 2 years, you've got to be good enough to keep on going. I couldn't go down, I could only go up. And, you know, all the stars lined up perfectly, and on my 3rd year of racing, I won Daytona and Sebring back to back. So that was the start.
That's incredible. It's an incredible story. Yeah. And your mom says when you're even younger, when you put on a helmet, I think you had a go-kart, right?
Yep.
And when you put on that helmet, you're a completely different person. What did she mean by that? What happens in that moment when you put on a helmet that she saw early on?
Well, I think that, I mean, the helmet is an element that I think most drivers fall into that thing. When they put their helmet on, that's business. You know, all your rest of the things that are going on in your life go out the window, and you're focused on the job that you have to do behind the wheel of the race car. And so she saw that. She saw the personality change, the competitive spirit come out. So it was always brought forward when we put the helmet on. So, you know, she saw that. And I think that most other drivers are the same way. Their helmet is the key to the competitive spirit.
Yeah, you know, when I think of racers, they seem normal, like you guys seem normal, but when you get on the track, you are animals. You are insane. And I think about a few years ago, I don't know if you remember, I came to Road Atlanta, a track I'd never driven on, to try the new GT3 RS. And everybody was excited. They said, you know, it's been raining for a couple days, and Hurley's been taking journalists around the track, but there's sun today, so you're going to have some fun. I said, well, I'm not sure I want to have fun with Hurley Haywood. And I came to you and I said, Hurley, you know, I don't know this track, and there are a couple of elevation changes, and I don't know if I'm going left or right, and I don't want to crash one of their cars. And you said, don't worry, it's all going to be fine. And then you went, bam, and just disappeared. And I had you in my ear. They had the little walkie-talkie there, and you're like, keep up with me, screaming at me. It's one of my favorite memories. And I made myself sick on that first ride in a Cayman, I think, in a GT4 of all things, at 7 in the morning, having too much coffee. I rested for a second. I asked you to take me out on the track, and I did a ride along with you in the GT3 RS. And I've never experienced the GT3 RS the way I did that day with you behind the wheel. You're an incredible driver, but I remember you took me up to 160 into a hard left turn. I don't know what turn that is at Road Atlanta. And I felt ceramic brakes for the first time. I felt the downforce of the car for the first time. It was really incredible, and it's a humbling moment for us normal folks when you know that you don't have any talent close to what these guys have, right? Tell us, you know, Patrick, and we spoke a little bit about this on the podcast, but what have you learned from Hurley as far as, you know, how to race? What are his best tips that he's given you over the years?
Chew gum.
Chew gum was the biggest thing. Chewing gum was my big, and every time I would do any kind of videos or interviews, Porsche would always come back to me. They were upset that I was always chewing gum. And it was because, you should tell the story of why you started chewing gum early on, and why was that?
Well, the gum keeps your mouth, you know, moist, and it you know, when you're chomping on a piece of gum, it's a tension reliever. You know, you have to find ways to sort of relieve the tension, because if you let the tension build up too strong, then you're going to make a mistake. So I always found that, one, the gum kept your mouth, you know, moist, and two, it was a good way to relieve the stress.
But what if you crash and choke on the gum?
Well, that's the thing, right?
It goes right away.
Everybody's like, what are you doing chewing gum in the car?
Yeah.
If you're going to crash, you can spit it out. You know you're going to crash.
At 160.
Right.
You also,
and it bounces back into your mouth from your helmet.
That makes no sense. I thought you meant chew gum on the way to the car, but then spit it out. But you're saying in the car.
Well, the problem is it becomes part of your ritual, right? Before you get in and put your head. And I remember one time someone had taken my stacks of gum right before getting into a stint at Le Mans, and I was completely panicked. my whole preparation was based around having gum. If I didn't have gum, I was out of sequence with my ritual. And I completely panicked and finally got a piece of gum at the last minute, jumped in the car, and it took me 2 laps to get everything figured out because I was all spun out. So
Yeah,
it's
because
like-
your system was. What kind of gum do you
But if
like,
it got-
Hurley?
Anything that's chewable.
I wish we'd had it as a sponsor. It would have been
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
You also say be patient, too, as far as racing. Explain to us what that means in a race car. Why patience? And I know it's an endurance race, but
Well, when you look at the mistakes that people make in a race car, it's usually because they lose patience. They want to make a move and they don't really properly analyze the downside of a move, and when you're racing in long distance racing, you have a huge variable of driver talent on the racetrack. Let's just talk about Daytona. You've got 60 some odd cars at Daytona. You've got 3 or 4, sometimes 5 people per car that are driving, and you have just an enormous variety of driver talent. So every car you come up to, you have to approach, because you can't really see who's in the car, you have to approach with the utmost of caution and still, run a relatively good lap time. So when you have the patience part of your sort of mindset, you can make that work really well and not have it jeopardize your lap time. And it just takes practice and it takes experience. Being patient is an element of experience. The more experience you have, the more patience you have.
now you both raced Le Mans and Daytona. You feel Daytona is a harder race to race than Le Mans?
More nighttime racing.
Yeah, there's more nighttime. Had a really interesting conversation about this very subject with Norbert Singer, who is the father of some of the greatest race cars that Porsche's ever had. And Norbert was with Peter, Greg, and myself in 1973 when we were racing the RSs at Daytona. We had one, and Roger Penske had one, and Norbert was there with that car. And I've been with Norbert all through the years, and I asked him that question. I said, what do you think is more difficult? And he said, if you take both races and what you have to do to win that race, it's pretty much the same. The difference is, however, at Le Mans, it's harder because of all of the rules and regulations. The rules, I was the Grand Marshal there this year, and the rules for that race are the size of a phone book. It's unbelievable how you expect a driver to understand, and the team and the managers. It's just ridiculous. And that's what makes it hard when you do make an infraction, and you have to come into the pits for a discussion. That discussion, like in IMSA, that discussion would be, don't do that again, or the next time I'm going to penalize you. Where at Le Mans, that discussion is 10 minutes. They're discussing what they're going to do for 10 minutes while the car sits static. So that makes the whole thing a lot more difficult. And
Which did you like more? You win Le Mans, and that changes your life as a driver, doesn't it? And the same, I think, could be said for you too, Patrick. Which one do you prefer? If you had to pick one as your favorite track to race, or the most significant track?
Le Mans.
Le Mans.
For me.
Why?
Certainly. It's just everybody in the world knows about that race. It's Monaco, it's Indy, it's any big sporting event. This is the one that if you're not a fan of the sport, you're watching. And I think the amount of pressure that is on a driver at that race in particular is far greater than any other race that I participated in. And if you could handle the mental aspect of it, you would be okay in the race.
Right.
And the best piece of advice was from Hurley was consistency with lap time. Not try to be the fastest, but be consistent. And that will ultimately get you a result at the end of an endurance race. And that was the thing that I would always hear his voice in my head. Always going into the bus stop at Daytona, by the way, which is where you make the biggest mistakes at night if you're not careful, and if you're not patient, that's where you get in trouble. And his voice would always pop up right before the break zone, consistency. Because if I could nail the entry into the bus stop, my lap time in the exit, my lap time would be consistent. And I could always tell right away if it was good or not. I had a mental block where I had to do a lot of visualization on getting the timing right, on the downshift and turn in. And once I got through that, that was the year we had our best results. But it was all...
Yeah. What about you, Hurley? What do you think?
Well, I'd have to agree with Patrick. I think, I think both of the races, the only thing that's the same is the distance, 24 hours. Le Mans is super fast. I mean, your average speed at Le Mans per lap is 165 miles an hour, which means that you're well over 200 for a lot of the, the Mulsanne Straight. Even though you've got chicanes there, you still get over 200 miles an hour between the two chicanes. And then after you get through the hairpin at the end of the straight, you've got also another really long straightaway where actually that's the fastest speed on the racetrack now. And when you put together a lap, a really good lap there, you really know it. You know everything is working, everything is perfect on that lap, and you smile and you say, this is going to be a good lap. You know that before the time comes up. Where Daytona, you've got so many variables to deal with at Daytona. You've got, a lot of the times you don't have the driver quality that you do at Le Mans. You've got really great cars. They've certainly improved that over the years. So I think the package that IMSA has right now is really a good package. They got great looking cars. And I went over there, with the ability to sit down and talk to the ACO, which is the Automobile Club of the West, which regulates Le Mans. And they are very closely tied to the FIA. And I said, why can't you guys get your heads together, get into a room, work out your rule package, and you guys are not going to leave this room until you figure it out. And why I said that was that IMSA right now has a really great class. It's called DPI. And our team, Brumos, was the first team that actually had a DP car, a fab car. And that was 2003. And that concept has developed itself over the years to really a great class, which they now call DPI, DP International. And there's no reason that I can think of why those cars could not qualify to race at Le Mans. And from a safety standpoint, they got carbon fiber tubs, and they got variable manufacturers that supply the engines. So they're stubborn. They just don't want to do it. And if they did it, it would make life a lot simpler on both sides of the ocean.
Let me ask you just a human question about preparing for Le Mans. Like, I always think about the things like, so it's 24 hours. What are you doing before? Are you getting a good night's sleep before it? Is it this Red Bulls and we're up the whole time? Or how does sleep work? Either one of you, how do you go into that race? What have you done up until that moment?
You're running around from, scrutineering, which starts on Sunday. You don't really get into the car until Wednesday.
Right.
It's a full week of a lot of press, a lot of activation for the sponsors, and then just the size of the fans. The crowds are overwhelming.
So you're just going to stay up?
You're going. So by the time the race starts, you're exhausted.
Right.
You hope you're not in the first stint, so you can take a nap and get ready. And
so what do you do? 5-hour energies? What do you?
No,
you're
just tired the whole time. You're in a sort of a blissful fatigue state.
Really?
Yeah, you're sleepwalking, and it depends. Like Patrick Long he's like a narcoleptic because he'd go back to the trailer after his stint, fall right to sleep, wake up 10 minutes before he needed to, got it together and went.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I could never sleep. I was always just sort of half awake.
He was on the podcast too. I said, well, what do you do if you have to go to the bathroom? And he goes,
well, you go to the bathroom.
You go to the bathroom.
Right.
Wow, you guys are like astronauts. It's amazing.
I never had that happen.
I love it.
I drove with a lot of co-drivers that did that, but I never did that.
Never? Not once?
You don't want to
never.
inherit the seat after that. It's always like the worst.
Hurley, you talk about a 67 Corvette in college as the kind of taproot race car, the car that kind of wakes up the racer in you. Is that the car that starts it all? Did you ever race that car? Do you still have one? Do you still like
No,
those cars?
That's kind of a funny story, but it's when I graduated from high school, I went to boarding school up in Vermont, and my family was so excited that I actually graduated from some educational institution that they said, you know, what would you like? And I said, I want a motorcycle. So I ended up with a 650 Triumph, beautiful bike. I love that thing. And soon after I got that motorcycle, my mother started reading all these articles about how dangerous motorcycles were, and you know, so she came. She said, "You got to get rid of this motorcycle. You can." And I said, "Well, that's fine. I'll do that, but I got to have a car that has an equivalent performance value." So I went around and I looked at all the cars that were available. There was Nicky Chevrolet in Chicago, a hot rod store that sold really cool cars, and found this Corvette, very nicely priced. Brought my mother down. She said, "Oh, that's really cute. That looks like just like you." And so I told the salesman, I said, under no circumstances do we start this car when my mother is within it.
That's really great.
Because it was loud. And so that was the car I took off to college, and that's the car I used to beat Peter Gregg at an autocross that we were at. And Peter saw something that he, you know, was able to understand, and said, you know, maybe this guy's got what it takes, and maybe I'll take a chance and put him in one of my cars. And that's what happened. So I went. This was 1967, so you had to be 21 to get your license back then. And so I got my license May 4th, 1969. We raced in a world championship race at Watkins Glen in June. So I had zero racing experience on a racetrack with other cars. You know, autocross, you just one car at a time. So I said, how are we going to do this? And he said, it's simple. We'll get you a NASCAR license. It's $20 in the mail. Once you get that license, then you can apply for an FIA Grade B license. That's all you need to race in that race. And so we went there. SCCA was absolutely so pissed off they couldn't see straight, but there was nothing they could do. I had my license. And we ended up winning the class. We beat all the Corvette teams, factory teams. And that was the start. I was on cloud nine when I won a big international race. And then I got my draft notice. And the race was in June, and I was on an airplane going to Vietnam in November. So that adulation didn't last long.
Patrick, by comparison, what do you got? Go ahead.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
So that was your first race, competitive race at Watkins Glen?
Yeah, I think I had one regional race with maybe 4 cars in the race, but that was the first major race.
And
of my career.
was that the moment you knew you can do this and be successful in that? Or was it before that?
Well, I mean, that was a confidence builder. So I was, you know, world championship race at that time in 1969 at Watkins Glen. They had the best of the cream of the crop, and you had a lot of prototypes there and all kinds of different cars. And, you know, I managed to keep my head above water, and I said, okay, this is something that might work. And Peter definitely saw it. So he was very encouraging, you know, that we stick to our plan. And I had to take a year and a half off in the military and came back in '71 and started again. And we won. We were co-champions in '71, and then in '72 I took over the GT duties, won the championship while Peter was doing the Can-Am, and then the next year we switched. So I was doing the Can-Am in '73, and he was back in the GT cars. And you know,
Amazing.
Mark Donahue was the guy that really helped me out, because Peter was not helpful at all in getting my arms around a 917. That 917 scared him to death.
Right.
And so
What exactly did he find unsafe about it, and what is unsafe about it that you
Everything
didn't
is
care
unsafe
about?
about
Have you ever looked at a 917?
Yeah, I've been in
It's
them.
frightening.
Yeah, I know. One thing I noticed is my legs are awful far forward in front of that front axle where the tires are. Right?
Yeah, well, that's sort of you got to remember that a 917-10 was a car that had aluminum tubing the size of your finger, strapped to a 1,250 horsepower engine, where the chassis was checked if it was in, the integrity of the chassis was good. It was done with air pressure. So my mechanic would air pressure the chassis to 100 pounds, walk away, come back in a half an hour, and if it held 100 pounds, then everything was good. So it was a flexi flyer. When you looked at the front of a modern race car, the spoiler is right on the ground. I mean, you couldn't get your foot underneath it. With the 917, there was probably 4 inches of space between when the car was static, between the spoiler and the ground. And that was the reason there was so much flex in the car as you go around a corner, that they had to get that distance. So it was alarming.
You like that?
I didn't know
Peter
any
Gregg
better.
says,
I didn't know any better.
You didn't know any better. All right, I want to leave some time for questions, but first, you guys are both building interesting cars right now. Let's flash forward to current day. Tell everybody what you just built that's built for off-roading in Porsche, and why you have that car.
The Safari car, Lee Keen.
It's a 911 Safari car he's built.
Yeah, so we use an 82 SC as a donor body, and it is, I have to tell you, the Safari cars are the most fun.
Why?
Because you can just trash the car, and it will run over anything. You can just drive it, and the more messed up it gets, the better it is. If you get dents in it, it doesn't matter. It just gives it a character, and it's just fun to drive in all seasons.
Have you had it off-road?
Yeah, constantly.
Where?
In
Gorman?
Maine, I have a little place in Maine, so I'm running around the dirt roads and trying to find any off-road availability for this car. And it's just a lot of fun.
You think the Safari car craze will last?
Yeah, I do. I think people will get turned on to it.
Yeah. Hurley, and I heard you're building something special in North Hollywood. Tell us about that car.
I've always, from a very early age, lusted after a 356, and I never could sort of get my arms around how expensive they are, and you pay that ungodly sum of money for a car that has absolutely zero technology. So I met Rod Emery, and we talked about what he was doing, and I said, that's perfect. So we ended up getting a 1959 A coupe. So we started with a coupe, and then Rod chops the top off, and the end result will be a speedster, 356 speedster.
Wow.
And he's got a 3.4 liter motor in it. It's going to be, or not, 2.4.
Okay, I was like,
Well.
And
And it weighs 50 pounds.
yeah, and
So
so
there
I'm
you go.
really excited about that car.
And what do you guys like that Porsche is making new right now? What are your favorite cars to get into?
Well, one of the great things about Porsche is that regardless of what car you're talking about, whether you're talking about a Cayenne, a Macan, a Panamera, or 911, their progression makes the cars much more usable for the general person, the general driver, but they're faster. So every year they get faster and faster and faster. These new generations, the 992, is phenomenal. And you think of the present 911s, and you say, how can they get any better than this? Yeah. And then they come out with the 992, and it's noticeably better. All these transitions that we've made with the different models and different components, and you say, yeah, it might be a little bit different. I feel it here or there. But with the 992, it's a big difference. You instantly feel it the minute you start to roll in it. So, and that's, I think, really special. But the whole lineup that Porsche has, whether it's a Macan, Cayman, all these cars are just phenomenal, and they suit the personalities of a vast array of people.
Can you say what variants of the 992 you've driven so far? Like GT3?
I have not, unfortunately, driven the 992
You
yet.
haven't yet.
But I've talked to a bunch of people that have, and they all kind of the same thing.
What
comes out
about
of it.
what about you, Patrick?
I had an opportunity to drive the 918 at the Red Bull Ring in Austria, hot laps, and it was so much fun to drive. It was consistent, it was predictable, and just you were smiling the whole time. It was a blast. But I think what's interesting about the entire fleet is that the DNA is in every model, depending on what your need is. Like the Panamera to me, the Gran Turismo Sport is what I'm really into right now. And it's nice to go through the fleet. But if you're in a big city, the Macan is great to get around. I'm very fortunate to go around and try each one in different environments. And the DNA is in each one. It feels the same.
Yeah.
A little different characteristically. There's little nuanced things there, but it feels the same way, which is nice. It's consistent.
Fantastic.
So I like them all. It just depends on. But I have to say the Cayenne, the GTS version to me is my favorite.
Yeah. And you guys are on those sweet deals where they just dump them in your driveway, right? Whenever
We
you want them.
rotate through.
You rotate through.
But then it's fun to share it. The best part is when you have someone, especially kids, who have never been in the cars before, and you let them climb around and have their first moment, or either older people who have not had an opportunity. You just give them the keys and go take it for a drive and watch the reaction. And then they bring it back to you is the greatest satisfaction.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of the brand, I think.
I'll come in on that conversation. We just did a program, ran from LA up the Pacific Coast Highway with 6 journalists with 6 different variants of the Porsche product. And I was in the 918. And so it was really funny to see the reactions of very seasoned journalists that have not driven a 918 before. And suddenly they get in this road, or this car on a super road, the 33. I don't know if anybody's been on 33 before, but it is the most fantastic road that you ever could imagine. And they are just giggling like girls. I mean, they just, they go, oh my God, I can't believe this car is doing this. So it's fun to watch their reactions.
It's incredible. All right, the floor is yours, my friends. We have some questions. Let's start right here in the front. There's a microphone coming around, but I can hear you.
Years ago, I had the pleasure of sitting at the passenger seat in Birmingham, Alabama, in a Porsche 450 GT where you were driving. And much like you said, I was giggling like a schoolgirl. I think I cried a little as well. I recall, I don't know if that track's true, but like 200 miles an hour into a left-hand turn that you were just flying. And so I appreciate that. It taught me a lot about driving. My son right here just turned 16. Any advice for a new driver? And the driving age is 16 in Connecticut now.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. New driver advice.
Yeah,
Karting's great.
Yeah, karting is a really good foundation. And then if they're successful in the karting, and that's where a lot of the team managers go to search out new talent.
I meant new driver on the road.
Yeah, he means
No,
new
karting.
driver.
on the road.
Karting.
Oh, just what you need to do is before you start to, try these different things that people tell you about, doing donuts and doing all this kind of stuff, you've got to go to a driving school to learn the basics of what you're driving. I always tell fathers that have kids that are starting to drive, you want to start in a manual transmission car. Don't start in an automatic. When you have a manual transmission, your hands are either on the wheel or on the shifter. They're not on the phone looking at a text message. So that's really important. And once you sort of get the sequence of what you're doing with the manual transmission, then that sort of, as you go back to an automatic, you're still thinking about the process that you used when you were doing a manual transmission. So, start in a
Also,
manual.
start driving when you're 12 and lie about Corvettes. Do that too.
Just
All
get
right.
a rental car with a lot of insurance and go into a field
Don't.
and just have fun.
Gentlemen, it's great forum so far. Quick question. What watches are you guys wearing right now?
Oh, go ahead. Thank you. Good question.
Well,
And then I got two
I
other
have
super
a
quick.
Daytona.
Just one.
That was from 1991.
Beautiful.
Won that
Winning
race.
Daytona?
Yeah.
Wow. I don't even want to say what my watch
And
is.
then, Hurley, I watched you race up at PIR in Portland. I think maybe the first flame I saw come out of the back end of a car live was possibly you, but Any good little story about Portland International Raceway?
That was G.I. Joe, right? Yep. The G.I. Joe. Yeah, that was a interesting racetrack. The turn one is pretty interesting. That was really crowded. I think they've got some chicanes now that slows the cars down. But in the old days, I mean, you used to just fly down that straightaway, and then you'd have basically a parking lot as you go into turn one. So, yeah, it's great, and I love Portland. I love the city of Portland. They really treated us really great up there, and tons of good restaurants, and so I always enjoyed going there.
In the corner over there, all the way in
Yes,
the back.
sir.
Do we have a microphone on that?
Do you need a microphone, sir?
Oh, there you go. It's Mr. Jerry Seinfeld.
Hi,
Here comes the embarrassing question.
Hurley. If you could have any of your race cars to have today as a memento of your career, which one would you pick to own today?
That's a very good question.
Well, I've got most of the significant race cars that I've driven in our collection, which you've seen. We're building a new facility. When Brumos was sold almost 4 years ago now, the new owners, which are the Field Group, which is based out of Chicago, allowed us to keep our cars in where they were in the collection. Now that time has run out, so we made the decision to build a new facility, which is twice as big. It's going to be state-of-the-art. Dan Davis has got the same people that put together the displays for Ralph Lauren's collection and the collection down in South Florida. Not Morris, who's the guy down in South Florida?
The Collier.
Collier, yeah, Collier. So it's really going to be state-of-the-art, and we're really looking forward to it. I think we'll be in there. We're going to make the move with the cars, I think, in October. And, we have some great cars. One of the wonderful things about having Dan Davis as your partner is that he's very eclectic in his collection. He's got Miller race cars. He's got street cars. He's got all kinds of stuff, and it's really interesting to look at. So we're really excited about that.
If I'm not mistaken, I think he owns your Brumo 73 RSR, and he was trying to sell it back to you right in that moment.
Yeah.
I think that might have been what was going on.
Yeah.
Couple quickly, yeah, sure. Anybody, go ahead, chime in. What do you got?
Hi there. I'm actually 26 years married to a car guy, and I'm now a car girl.
I'm sorry.
And we have a GT3 and a GT4 and a GT3 RS, so that was really cool to hear. I also love 67 Corvette is my favorite Corvette ever.
There you go. Wow.
It's a pleasure to hear you speak. Both of you are amazing. So Hurley, I have a question to you. What's your favorite 911?
Favorite 911?
Oh, boy.
That's a tough
to
one.
quote Professor, next year's.
There you go.
Hey guys, great so far. I just have a question for Patrick. You were talking about how with the Hurley doc, you self-funded it. What do you think is the biggest risk that you've taken so far in your acting career, racing career, anything like that?
God, I think when you're comfortable and you make a decision to be uncomfortable again, those are the biggest decisions that you make because you don't know how it's going to end. So when you make a decision, and this kind of answers your question, I had an opportunity to race a full season with Porsche in the WEC or do a network television show, two of which these things may never happen again in my life. So I had gone as far as I could in one direction. I ceased growing creatively, and I needed to challenge myself. And jumping into that season and going after the dream, not knowing how it would turn out, I knew I had the right team. Those were the moments that you look back on and are tough decisions at the time, but the right decision in the long run. So keeping yourself comfortably uncomfortable. And still to this day, it's like, always doing that.
Okay, go ahead. You right in the front row. It's fine. I can hear you. I'll repeat your question.
My name is Teresa from Seattle, and thank you for serving as a fellow veteran. I'm from the Army. I was wondering what branch you served in, and did they let you drive anything really cool in the military?
What was it?
Did they let him drive anything really cool in the military?
Did you drive anything really cool in the military?
A Jeep.
Those are cool.
I was, when I got my draft notice, my family had the ability to not have me go to a conflict zone. And I said, no, I said to my dad, I said, you know, my country calls and I'm going to go serve my duty. So, thank you. Once that was out of the way, my mother then immediately became the head of the USO in Chicago, in the whole United States. And when I got over to Vietnam, you were assigned where you were going to go, and I ended up as an airfield commander's aide in Can Tho, which is a helicopter base, and it was a really good job. But you know, you were subject to a lot of stuff that is really hard to look at. When you even, you know, when I think about it today, it's hard. So. But I drove him around in the Jeep a lot, and you know, he was kind of a speed freak, and he had a Cobra as his own plane or helicopter that he flew around in, and I had to go with him a lot of the time. So it's only 2 places in a Cobra, 2 seats in a Cobra, and you know, I had to sort of learn the basics in case something happened. So. I swore to God that after I got out of the military, I would never ride in a helicopter, but that didn't work.
Okay, one more
All right,
question.
Patrick, this question's for you.
Gonna go. Here we go.
What spurred you on? What event or what spurred you on to get involved in this crazy world of race car driving?
I loved it. When I was a little boy, it was my dad was a big car fan. He owned a car, short track car in Maryland, so as a team owner. So we grew up with it, and certainly the 500 was always something we watched as a family. I'd always listen to it on the radio first because they would delay the telecast. I'd listen to it in the station wagon. We had a Chevy station wagon, and I would lay. So I wouldn't have to mow the lawn. I would lay on the front seat, and I'd listen to the race, and then I would hide if my mother came by, and then I would turn. So that's when it started.
Yeah.
My love for racing, and then it started up here. Actually, I did the Skip Barber School. My wife gave me a 3-day competition certificate, and that sort of opened everything wide open. And then I went to a charity event in Atlanta and met Don Panos. And got involved in the Panos Racing School and then the racing series, and that's when everything started very quickly at that point. But
well, gentlemen,
you get hooked. It's an addiction.
It's also it would tell everybody your first wheeled vehicle that you pursued when you were a child.
The first
wheel. It had one wheel.
Oh, a unicycle.
He was a unicycle rider.
That's how I got around.
Yeah, he started at Clown College. He's an accomplished juggler. There's more to this man than acting and racing, ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you guys for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, Hurley Haywood, Patrick Dempsey. The movie is Hurley. You got to check it out if you haven't seen it. Thank you all so much for being here. These guys.